affairs to order. The first item of business is the approval of the minutes from our meeting on October 31st. So moved. Second?
Second.
Any questions, comments, changes? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any no? Okay. We have no action items today. We have two information items for the Fiscal Affairs Committee. The first is from Matt Sapienza. Oh, there it is.
Hello.
An update on the executive budget.
Okay, thanks.
State's executive budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and hello, everyone. Welcome. A lot's happened since the last time we've all gotten together. The state executive budget has been issued, as well as the city preliminary budget for next year as well. So I wanted to give you all a presentation on where we stand with both the state and city budget. So in front of you, in part of your packets, is a PowerPoint presentation on the operating budget recommendations for both the city and state. So let's jump right into it. On page 2 is the state executive budget. So the governor issued the state executive budget about 3 weeks ago, and overall it provides a stable condition for us for next year. You can see there on page 2 that the operating budget recommendation for the state executive budget for CUNY is an increase of $137 million for next year, which represents a 7.2% increase compared to where we are in the current year. And the $137 million increase is comprised of two main funding sources. It's about a $71 million increase in state aid and about a $67 million increase in tuition revenue. Let me take the state aid piece first, and then we'll talk about the tuition. On the state aid, that $71 million is made up of $57 million in mandatory needs funding for fringe benefits. And one thing that I want to point out, we're very happy to point out, is that the $57 million in fringe also includes funding for adjunct health insurance, which, as you know, was part of our budget request for the current year, and so we're very pleased to see that that was funded as part of the governor's proposal for next year. The remaining $13 million in state aid represents a restoration of a one-time cut that was part of our total reduction package for the current year. We had a total cut of $95 million in the current year for our senior colleges. About $13 million of that is non-recurring, so those funds come back to us next year. So with the $13 million restoration and the $57 million in fringe benefits funding, we have about $71 million increase in state aid. And with these funds, we'll be able to cover all of our mandatory needs costs for next year, in addition to fringe benefits, all of the other mandatory needs that we have for building rentals, utilities, and the like. Okay, turning to page 3. As I said earlier, the other big component of our year-to-year increase that was included in the state budget was the state is recognizing the revenue that's associated with all of our tuition increases. And so the total that they're adding is a little over $66 million. And that's to bring us up to where we are in terms of what we're currently generating for revenue, and also to account for the $300 increase that we'll be doing next fall. So it'll bring our revenue budget up to date in terms of where we should be for next year. And just to break down that $66 million a little bit, because I don't want to leave anyone with the impression that that's how much the new $300 increase will generate. The $300 increase for next fall will generate around $51 million on an annual basis. Now, about $10 million of that we're going to need to set aside for the tuition assistance program waivers. I think as you all are aware of, the state legislation that was enacted last summer called for both CUNY and SUNY to cover the tuition difference between its current rate and the maximum TAPL, which is $5,000. So in the fall, once we go up by another $300, we'll be at $5,430 for a full-time resident student at our senior colleges. Will be $430 above the maximum, and we're going to need to set aside about $10 million to cover that difference. So in total, we'll have about $51 million in new revenue. The other $15 million difference between that number and what was recognized in the governor's budget are funds that the governor's and state division budget needed to put into budget to make up for where we were this year. So the revenue appropriation that they gave us this year was about $15 million short, and so they're getting us current in terms of what our overall revenue appropriation is. Okay, on page 4, you see a chart there that shows the year-to-year differences for our senior colleges by our 3 major funding sources: state aid, city support, and tuition. And you can see the breakout there: $70.8 million in state aid and $66.6 million in tuition revenue. So again, as we said earlier, a 7.2% year-to-year increase for the senior colleges. So that's certainly positive news. Turning to the community colleges on page 5, the base aid per FTE, which drives state aid funding for the community colleges, remains constant in the governor's proposal at $2,122 per FTE. The last several years, this number has been coming down quite significantly. In fiscal year 2009, we were at $2,675 per FTE, but with 4 years worth of cuts, we're now at $2,122 per FTE. So it's over a 20% reduction. However, for the fiscal 13 executive budget, the governor is proposing to keep that number constant at $2,122. And because we've had so much enrollment increase in the community colleges over the last several years, that enrollment is part of the funding formula because it's based on how many full-time enrollment students that you have. So that'll generate about $7.4 million additional community college state aid for us for next year. There was a legislative increase in the current year for community college child care centers for $544,000. That was not included in the governor's executive budget, but it was a legislative add. And so that will be part of our lobbying efforts with the Senate and the Assembly to put those funds back. And I'm going to get to that on a slide coming up shortly. Okay, so page 6, we have the same chart for the community colleges as we saw previously for the senior colleges. State aid with the enrollment increases, not only that we're anticipating for next year, but in the prior years to bring us again up to what our current level should be. It's an increase of $9.2 million in total, which is a 5.2% increase in community college state aid. Tuition is unchanged in the state budget because that is really accounted for as part of the city budget process. And so when the city executive budget comes out in April, we'll have an adjustment to our tuition to account for next fall's tuition increase. Okay, page 7. In terms of the financial aid, the state executive budget did not propose any changes to the tuition assistance program, which was a good thing because the last several years the executive budget has included pretty consistently reductions to the state tuition assistance program, and so the state legislature has had to spend a lot of its time and capital on putting back those reductions to the TAP program, and that's taken up a lot of the conversation regarding higher ed during the adopted budget negotiations. So the fact that TAP cuts are off the table this year is a positive thing for us, and the legislature can devote its time on concentrating on other needs for higher ed. As you all know, in bullet 2 there, we're describing an item that was part of our budget request for fiscal 13 that the board approved back in November, that will be implementing a $5 million financial assistance program that will include additional tuition waivers, include ways for making textbooks more available for our students, and provide more work-study opportunities for our students for next year. And lastly, the new legislation that was enacted last summer called for both the CUNY and SUNY Board of Trustees to conduct a study and to make recommendations to the Higher Education Services Corporation, the entity which administers the TAP program, to make recommendations on changes to the TAP program. And so, although the report is not due out until 2013, we've already begun work on that and discussions with CUNY about that report and those recommendations. Okay, now page 8. On the previous slides, we've looked at what the numbers were and what the facts were in terms of what was included in the state executive budget. And so on slide 8, we want to go through for a few minutes what our operating budget priorities are and what are those items that we're going to be asking the legislature to take a look at and to help us with during the adopted budget cycle. And so the first item is what we talked about just a few minutes ago, state aid for community colleges. And as I mentioned earlier, the base aid has gone down by over 20% over the last 4 years. So we've had significant reductions in our base aid to the community colleges. And so we're asking the legislature to increase base aid at least $100 per FTE for the fiscal 13 budget, which would generate $8.1 million. Our second item is also an item that we're asking the legislature to support our community colleges in, and that is the expansion of the ASAP program, the Accelerated Studies and Associate Program. It's been a very successful initiative for us. In the first 3 years, the first cohort that we had a graduation rate of 55% at the end of 3 years. The national average is 16%, and the CUNY average for the 3 years is 24%. And the goal was to graduate 50% in the first 3 years, and we were able to do 55. So it's a very successful program. We want to expand it and include more students, and we also want to expand it to our senior colleges who administer associate degree programs, College of Staten Island, City Tech, and Medgar Evers. And so we're asking the legislature to provide $5 million to expand that program. The child care centers, as I mentioned earlier, the legislative addition in the current year was not put in the governor's executive budget, so we're asking the legislature to restore those funds. And lastly, the CUNY Leads program, which is a program that provides both academic and employment services to our students with disabilities. We had a $2 million grant with the State Education Department, which sunset 2 years ago. The university's been self-funding it for the last couple of years because it is such a terrific program, and we really get a solid return on our investment. We've done studies and working with with our student services office that show that every $10,000 investment in this program provides savings to the state of $14,000 in disability payments that they do not have to make because these students end up being employed through this program. So it's a terrific program, and we've already had some discussions with the legislature about restoring those funds. So those are our operating budget priorities and what we'll be focusing on, and we've already begun discussions with the state legislature about. Last Wednesday, the Chancellor testified at a state legislative budget hearing, and we talked about all of these items, and again had separate discussions with members of both the Assembly and the Senate to discuss these initiatives. Okay, turning to the city's preliminary budget. Last Thursday, the mayor issued his preliminary budget for fiscal 13. And the city budget has one additional step in it that the state budget does not, which is this preliminary budget that the mayor usually issues sometime in late January or early February. This is the first step before the executive budget, which the mayor will issue sometime in most likely late April. And so in the preliminary budget, again, the word stability that I used for the state budget describes our condition on the city budget as well. There's no further reductions to CUNY's community colleges for both the current year and for next year. The preliminary budget continues to provide funding at current year levels for the community colleges, and also provided funding to continue some of the existing programs at current year levels, like the Accelerated Study and Associates program, CUNY Prep, which the city has been funding for the last several years, Civic Justice Corps, which is an initiative at John Jay College, and the Young Men's Institute. So again, good news on the city side, no further reductions are planned at the community colleges. Okay, last slide are what are the next steps in terms of the operating budget process for fiscal 13. Well, the state budget is due to be adopted by April 1st. While we were up in Albany last week, we heard a lot of folks telling us that everyone is very motivated to get it done early this year, so we're hopeful that will occur. The city executive budget will in all likelihood be issued in late April. Once the state adopted budget's done and the city has a better check on how the state budget affects the city's bottom line, the mayor will issue his executive budget, and that the university will continue to work over the next several months on the state side with both the Senate and the Assembly and the executive branch. And then once the city's executive budget is done, we'll work with both sides of City Hall, both the mayor's office and the city council. So again, to summarize, I think the key word so far for us for next year, fiscal 13, is stability. Not only do we not foresee any additional cuts to our senior or community colleges, but with the additional tuition revenue and with the funding that we've received so far and anticipate to receive, we should be able to make some really critical investments in full-time faculty, student services, our facilities, and the like through our compact initiative, so that our students on campuses feel a real benefit for next year.
Thank you, Matthew. Any questions for Matt Sepian? Yes.
I don't know if it's appropriate, but I had the occasion to read the prepared testimony of the Chancellor before the Joint Budget Committees, and I was struck by the capital construction program. Is it appropriate to talk about that?
Sure.
Okay?
Absolutely.
What struck me was the phrase that 20% of all construction projects in the city are CUNY projects.
That is correct.
And what struck me is that the program will slow down next year.
Yeah.
And what struck me was that we have shovel-ready projects that are needed. So was there any discussion of that?
There was
That
there was a lot of discussion
would be
about
helpful
that.
to CUNY and the city?
Yeah, there was a lot of discussion about that, and one of the things that the Chancellor mentioned in his testimony last week, which I thought was an excellent point, was that not only is our capital construction program benefiting CUNY, but it's also been a workforce development program for the entire city.
20% of
Because
the
as you say,
construction.
20% of all
Did that
construction going on
resonate
in the city.
anyplace up there?
I think so. I think, our discussions with folks from the legislature, I think were encouraging in terms of getting some assistance on the capital program. And during the question and answer part of the testimony, there was a lot of feedback and questions about our capital program.
I have spoken to the governor, and every one of the governor's top people about this. It's even more complex than as you described. Enigmatic, I think, is probably even a better word. We have a project at New York City College of Technology that has about $200 million in appropriated money that is basically sitting in a holding pen where we can't get access to it to start this project because the project is not fully funded. And when I brought this up to the attention of all of the right people and saying, this is absurd, we're not going to need to come back to the state of New York for about 3 years for additional money. Let us start using what we have in place and get this project going. I mean, for those of you who have been on the New York City College of Technology's campus, you realize how deplorable their physical plant is. The response that I got is that there are a plethora of projects that are partially funded in the state of New York, and all of them have not been given the green light to move. And secondly, that the likelihood, at least in the short run, of a new capital program is minimal at best. And the best that we've been able to achieve, which is important, is this critical maintenance of about $284 million. And that's for really emergency repairs and things of this nature. So with the bond cap really at a point which is at a level where new legislation would have to be enacted to increase that bond cap, and with not allowing all of these projects that are partially funded to go forward, and the prospect of a new capital program not in the cards as yet, the picture is not a pretty picture. But it has been top people in the legislature I've spoken to, and all people around the governor I've spoken to, and we'll see. We're hoping that some of this will get unleashed this session, but I'm just not sure. Long answer, but that's where we are.
Anyone else? Any other questions or comments? There being none, we'll go to the report for the Chief Investment Officer, Janet Crone, as well as the folks from board, in this case Mark Fowler from Cambridge Associates.
Thank you. Just wanted to summarize performance for 2011. First, by reviewing the markets in general, just very briefly, before getting to our asset allocation and the pool's performance. I think everybody knows that this was a very volatile year, macro-driven by numerous events around the world. U.S. stocks ended the year up 2.1%, but not without significant volatility until that time. Outside of the U.S., stocks didn't fare so well. Developed market equities, non-U.S., were down 12%, while emerging market equities were down 18%. High-quality fixed income beat equities around the globe. Global sovereign bonds were up 6.2%, while in the U.S., the intermediate government corporate index was up 8%. Commodities ended the year down 13% as measured by the Dow Jones UBS Commodity Index. Hedge funds were down, and really the brightest point in the market was an area that we're not invested in, which is private equity. U.S. private equity in particular had double-digit returns, primarily due to disclosure of increased valuations and some IPO activity. Venture capital was up 21%. This is for the year ending September 30, the quarter lag. Private equity in the U.S. was up 14% over that period. If you turn to 2 pages to the first page of the flash report, just wanted to briefly review our asset allocation, which in general we have 55% in global equities, both in and outside the U.S. We have 19% in what we call diversifying assets, such as hedge funds and real assets, 26% in fixed income, and as I said, we have nothing in the non-marketable or private area. By comparison, and just for your information, on average, our peers have about 36% in global equities versus our 55%, 36% in diversifying assets versus our 19%, 14% in fixed income versus our 26%, and 14% in the non-marketable private investment area. So we have a conservative portfolio, has a greater exposure to global equities, fixed income, less of an exposure to hedge funds, and no exposure to the non-marketable area. So if you turn to page 5, as a result of the performance of the various asset classes and our asset allocation, the pool ended down 1.6% for calendar year 2011, and this is due to primarily 3 factors. The first one is the underperformance by Wellington, our real was underweighted in TIPS when the market was hit pretty badly. They also have a cyclical tilt to their portfolio, which hurt. Also, our exposure is greater to international equities, which was hurt more than U.S. equities. And within that international equity portfolio, we have one manager in particular that has not performed very well, which Mark Keller will go into in a minute. And of course, the third factor being no exposure to the private equity area. The good news is that our negative 1.6 return is actually above median and 60% of our peers in the Cambridge universe. And the preliminary numbers for January 2012 suggest that the portfolio is up about 4%. And we just recently received the full results on the Kubo for fiscal year 2011, where the pool was up 21.3% for the fiscal year 2011, beating the billion-dollar-plus endowments, which returned 20%, beating the average public college return of 19%, and the average CUNY Foundation return of 16%. So we're pleased with the relative results, and unless there are any questions, I'll turn it over to Mark to discuss an aspect of our international equity portfolio.
Is there any questions, comments? No, Mark?
If you want to flip one page, I think this would be a good page to focus on when we talk about an update to the international equity manager structure that we're proposing. So on page 6 of Janet's report, you can see that you have 3 international equity managers, Philadelphia, Walter Scott, and International Value Advisors, which is IVA. When you look at Philadelphia International Advisors' performance since inception, you can see it's been a bit disappointing. We've looked at them when we did the investment planning review a few years ago and recommended not firing them at that time. They had gone through a bout of underperformance, and we think it's still a reasonable core option. But looking forward, we have a bit more confidence in the other 2 managers in your portfolio structure. So we're recommending termination of Philadelphia International and distributing the proceeds between Walter Scott and IVA. This will dial back the risk in the portfolio a little bit. IVA and Walter Scott are a bit more conservatively positioned. And when we look at how this impacts the analytics of your portfolio, is essentially pulling some money out of Europe and diversifying a little bit more. Both Walter Scott and IVA will hedge currency exposure. So, for instance, IVA has been concerned about the euro and has been hedging exposure there, whereas Philadelphia does not hedge currency exposure. So the other 2 managers have a little bit more tools in their arsenal in order to manage what we think is going to be a continued challenging environment. And so the recommendation is to just split those proceeds, 70% to IVA and 30% to Walter Scott. Happy to go into more detail, but I'll pause and see if there are any questions.
Questions?
On page 12, why did the percentages for things that were not impacted, or at least that didn't appear to be impacted, like real assets, change?
I can't hear the question.
Professor Martel, can you repeat that, please?
Sure. On page 12, there's a pie chart with the current portfolio and what I assume was the current portfolio we allocated with the 70-30 split, and I'm seeing other things, percentages change. Is that just rounding error or something that I would have thought only the international equities would have changed, but U.S. equities changed?
The reason those percentages change at the margins is that IVA has a broader mandate, and so they can invest in fixed income. They have a position in gold, which is impacting the real assets number So those numbers have changed at the margins. The IVA does have exposure to US equities.
Why?
They're a global mandate, and their exposure to North America, which would include Canada, is currently 36.9%, which is on page 13 of the presentation.
Thank you. I had an unrelated question back on page 6, just for my information, I'm looking at Boston Trust Capital Equity Fund, its allocation is that, are we building that up?
That's correct. That is a manager that focuses on the small and mid-cap part of the market. And the idea is to build that up over time, but given the valuation differential between large cap stocks and small and mid-cap stocks, we're comfortable going in slow right now, since large cap stocks look to be a better value than small and mid-cap.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Martinez. Any further questions, comments? There being none, we will go into the subcommittee on audit. Turn it over to Peter Penzolino.
Do we have to approve that management switch?
No,
No.
Thank you.
it's an FYI, yeah, it's an information meeting.
Okay, we have, subcommittee on audit, we have one action item, which is first of all, the approval of the minutes of the meeting of November 29, 2000.
Second?
That was easy. We have information items. You just want to skip those two, or?
Don't ask that question.
The information items are the audit report on the Auxiliary Enterprise Corporation and College Associations. And I ask Barry Kaufman to introduce that, please.
Thank you, Chair Pantaleo. This is the audit report, and this is strictly an informational item, and I want to explain that in a minute. But it's the audit report on the college associations, which is the group that receives most of its revenue from the student fees. And secondly, on the Auxiliary Enterprise Corporation, which receives most of its revenue through bookstore commissions, parking, cafeteria, vending, and food service, and facilities. We had this year brought in the audit firm of Tosky and Company to do the audits. There are about 40 audits that they've conducted. Some of you may wonder why there's no opinion expressed in the report that we prepared, which we've called the 2011 College Association Report, the 2011 Auxiliary Enterprise Report. There is no audit opinion expressed because the Tosky has expressed an opinion on the 40 individual audits for the auxiliaries and the associations. So in effect, these are not the university's combined financial statements. These financial statements that that have been performed for the associations and for the auxiliaries are rolled up into the university's combined statement each year. They are reviewed by KPMG, but in effect, they are statements that effectively belong to the associations and the auxiliaries and to those boards of directors. What we have done is to take the independent audits and combine them into a report just to highlight some of the more salient points about that, about each of the audits. So what I'd like to do now is to introduce the people from Tosky who will talk about the audit and tell you that the format that we're going to follow on this is to, as you look at your agenda, is the meeting outline, the report to the trustees, and then the internal control letter, and then answer any questions you have about the report that we had prepared. So let me start out by introducing from Tosky and Company, Mr. Ronald Tosky to my left, actually to my far left, on the table here. Next to him is Don Zimmerman. Next to Don is Rob Williams, and I'm going to ask Rob and his colleagues to make the presentation.
Okay, just some brief comments. What we're going to do is review the meeting outline for the related entities and just give you a brief engagement overview. Again, as Barry mentioned, we performed audits at 40 associations and auxiliaries, the related entities of City University, for the year ended June 30th, 2011. And the key thing here is that we received excellent cooperation from the staff of the related entities. The transition from the prior auditors went very smoothly. All the feedback that we've received has been outstanding. The audit engagements were completed earlier than in prior years. I think in a prior year ended June 30th, 2010, many of the engagements weren't completed until the subsequent June 2011. We completed all the engagements by December 31st, 2011 for the year ended June 30th, 2011. Our goal next year will be to complete these and get you drafts by October 31st, 2012 for the June 30th, 2012 audits. So again, we're going to try to move all the deadlines up a little bit. Second point there is with regard to deliverables. As I mentioned, all the deliverables have been provided to the related entities, the 40 related entities. We provided the audited financial statements. We provided the management letters and reports and internal controls. We provided reports to the board, and we provided all of the tax returns to the various related entities. All that work has been completed. The third item is the report to the trustees, and again, that's a separate document. You all have that in front of you?
No.
Just going through that very quickly then.
What's the date of it?
Pardon?
The date, so I can follow it in hard copy, please.
February 6th, 2012 at the top, right under the report to the trustees, on our letterhead, Toski & Co. So everybody have that document?
Joe, is that in our iPad somewhere?
Yes,
It is.
just if you go to the next page.
It appears,
If you print it, you're safe.
Is it under audit subcommittee?
yes.
Yes. That's it, yeah.
We do have some extra hard copies if somebody.
Yeah, 'cause I don't see it.
Some of them are not loaded.
Yeah, mine isn't loaded.
We didn't know they were
It's always good to rely on paper, isn't it?
Leaves an audit trail.
Yes.
Oh, it worked. It was loaded.
So it looks like this side of the table is okay, and this side maybe not so. Okay, so again, reviewing the report to trustees, and again, just a quick overview. The purpose of this report is just to kind of improve communications between our firm and your committee. And with regard to significant audit findings, we reported our significant audit findings in our management letters. Those management letters were issued to the individual associations and auxiliaries, the related entities. And these findings are summarized in our overall internal control letter, which we'll review with you next. Second point, significant accounting policies. All these significant accounting policies are indicated in, described in detail in footnote 2 to all the various financial statements of the related entities. On the next page, accounting estimates. As part of our audit work, we determined that estimates that are being used by management are in fact reasonable, and the estimates are used to calculate things like the receivables, the accrued liabilities, depreciation expense, that type of thing. As far as difficulties encountered in performing the various audits, we encountered no difficulties in the current year whatsoever. Corrected and uncorrected misstatements. We had no material misstatements after all of our adjustments were recorded. Disagreements with management. There were no disagreements whatsoever with management, of the related entities, just the opposite. Management was very cooperative and assisted us in completing the audits efficiently. Additionally, the accounting records were generally found to be in excellent condition, and we look at a lot of documentation on these small audits, and all the documents that we did request were in fact provided. Management representations, as part of our audit work, we request certain representations from management. They deal with things such as the fact that all the financial records, the minutes, and the related data were provided to us, and that management has no knowledge of any fraud, and there are no additional liabilities that must be recorded, and that no events have occurred subsequent to year end that need to be disclosed in the financial statement. And the point here is management did provide those representations, and there were no issues. On the last page, management consultations. There was no consultation that took place with regard to any other accounting firms. And other audit findings or issues. There are no other issues that arose prior to our retention as auditors. That is the report to the trustees, and Doug Zimmerman will comment on the internal control items.
And for those of you with the paper copies, that would be the bound document that we just passed out. This is a summary of the internal control issues that were noted during the conduct of our audit. As Ron and Barry mentioned, we reviewed the 22 associations and the 18 auxiliaries at the senior and community colleges. And this report really is a summation of those various letters that have been issued to the governing boards of those various organizations. Page 1 really describes our responsibilities, and our primary responsibility in connection with this engagement was to issue our opinions on the overall financial statements. However, as part of that audit process, we do review the internal controls and the operations of the organization in order to design our audit procedures for issuing our opinion. And the comments that we've included in this report are a synopsis of those issues that we detected as a result of reviewing those internal controls and the operating procedures. Page 2 of that document describes the 3 levels of internal control issues and other matters that we may bring to the board's attention. Those are material weaknesses, which are the most significant issues that would involve possible material misstatements of the organization's financial statements, and we've identified those in section 1 that I'll briefly touch on. Significant deficiencies are lesser issues. However, they are issues that want to be brought to the attention of the governing board, and as part of our procedures, we did not detect any significant deficiencies. And the third classification, there are other matters shared with the entity's management, and we describe those in section 2, and those would be the various comments that we reported to the governing boards in our management letters. There were actually 2 material weaknesses that we'll describe in section 1, and 17 other matters that were described in section 2. The matters of material weakness, they impacted 3 of the organizations that we reviewed. One had to do with the New York City College of Technology, and the other matter that we report on page 1 there had to do with the Megger Eggers organization. The other matters that we shared with managements and with the entity management, we've identified in the remaining pages of this document, and they are classified A through Q on pages 1 through 6. The journal entry review and approval process was at 1 entity. The verification of concessionaire provided information was at 2 of the organizations. The accounting policies and procedures manual was at 3 organizations. Outstanding checks was noted at 4 of the organizations. The bad debt policy at 2. Board governance at 1. Board of directors at 1. The board minute issue was at 5 of the organizations. Budgeting at 1. Approval of cash disbursements at 2. Cash handling at 1. Concession revenue, or excuse me, commission revenue at 1. Financial reporting we noted at 2. A key deposit issue at 1. Off-site storage of computer files at 2. The review of bank reconciliations at 1, and the significant deficiencies was also at 1. Let me just point out in total, we've reviewed again the operations at 40 different organizations. We've identified the issues here. However, 19 of them did not have any issues of the 40. So really the issues we're describing here occurred at 21 of the 40 organizations. 13 of those had only 1 issue. 5 had 2. 2 of them had 3, and there was only 1 organization that had a number of issues, and that was at 5. So overall, there was excellent internal controls at the various organizations, and again, there was only 1 that had a high number of issues that were reported back to the governing board. That's really a synopsis of the various items that we've reported at the auxiliary and association level, again, back to their boards of directors.
Can I just make one amendment to what Don said, and that is, these were not significant deficiencies.
No.
As I recall, these were other related matters, so they did not fall into the significant control or material weakness category. Question?
There are no questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have to have questions, right?
I suppose.
Not necessarily.
Tosky and Company has got is this a multi-year contract?
Yeah, yes.
So when you go back, by the way, I found this extremely valuable and extremely useful, and thank you.
Thank you.
So I expect when you go back next year, you will
Absolutely
expect some
correct,
of
yes.
these.
Yeah, we'll make sure that we do good follow-up and, you know, that everybody, and that's really the purpose of these comments. It's not, nobody likes criticism, and then again, a lot of the organizations, you know, they're not really like the comments, and then we had some pushback on some of them, but we will absolutely go back and, you know, make sure that these issues are all attended to, and that's really the purpose, that everybody improves. Nobody's, you know, trying to criticize anybody. It's just,
That's great. I understand these particular types of enterprises, and particularly one subset doesn't lend itself so clearly to internal controls. I shouldn't say that. It's more difficult to have the internal controls. But with specific reference to item 1, material weaknesses, you cited material weaknesses in 2 different institutions.
Yes.
When you saw that, did that raise your level of review of the documents?
We would adjust our audit program and audit plan based on the fact that there were unreconciled, as an example, in the first instance, there were some certain unreconciled intercompany issues. So we expanded the test work in that area to account for the fact that there was a material deviation, which typically we would not plan for, but once detected, we increased our audit work in that area to compensate for the weakness that we detected, yes.
So then the audit committee can take comfort in the fact that having found a few material weaknesses, you increase the height, the sensitivity?
the audit test work.
The scope of the
expanded.
Scope of the audit.
Scope of the audit.
Yes.
Exactly. So it's a long way of saying yes to your question.
We also asked, in both instances, we asked the college to respond to the audit findings or the material weakness. And in the case of City Tech, they of course made the adjustment in their books, and also indicated that they would be doing their reconciliation on a monthly basis now. And in the case of Medgar Evers, they have created an executive committee to work with the auxiliary board, and they are also reviewing their staffing and looking at the prospect of bringing on some additional staff, as well as looking at some internal checks and balances that they could do with their existing staff.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. I reviewed the audit with Controller Kaufman and Deputy Controller Kadowitz at some depth and detail. And I would like to join Professor Martell in complimenting you on your thoroughness and professionalism in the way you conducted it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, Valerie, sorry.
I just noticed and I congratulate you, and I'm glad that we're able to see this information. I just noticed there are a couple of colleges that I don't know how many years I've been reviewing this, seem to stay on this list continuously. What is the relationship with those colleges? And I guess this is more a question for the chancellor. You know, not having boards of directors. I mean, these are issues that have been come up for a number of years. When is the accountability, or what happens?
On the auxiliary services area, which is, I think, probably the most problematic, because there are all different layers of professionalism, depending upon the institution and the size. We try to work with the campuses to get them to do the quality assurance that really is necessary. There are still a number of campuses, as you have rightly identified, that are continuing to have work-in-progress issues. But eventually we're going to get there. Nothing dramatic, as you can see in any of these. These are all small issues, but they are issues nonetheless, and they're just going to need to improve. And our staff and Barry and the rest of his staff are working with these campuses to try to get them to be at the level of our other campuses. But it's not it is still a work in progress.
All of the auxiliaries have a board of directors organization, and the board of directors usually consists of administrative staff, faculty, and students. and they look to distribute the funds that come in. As the Chancellor said, there is variability in terms of the staffing, in terms of the skill set, and that's something that we work with. We meet each year, I would say twice a year, we meet with both the auxiliaries and the associations. We have them come in and we provide training in accounting, in the procedures that we expect them to follow, especially as we go through a mid-year close and a end-of-year close. And I think that over the years, I think we've seen some improvement in this, but there still is some way to go, and it's a work that we continue to monitor and work closely to the extent that we can with the colleges.
I appreciate it. I just, when you said all of them have boards of directors, one is noted and not having.
Right, and that has changed.
That's better.
Thank you.
We're now out of the subcommittee.